Okay, welcome everyone. We're here for prioritizing accessible content for information literacy instruction, and we have four presenters. All four presenters are undergraduate education librarians at the University of Buffalo, so I won't be repeating that as I introduce each of them. We have Keith Nichols, who specializes in assessment. We have Molly Maloney, who specializes in the development of instruction and materials for non-native speakers of English. We have Bryan Sajecki, who specializes in the development of first-generation college students, as well as gamification in library instruction. And we have Nicole Thomas, who has produced several instructional videos for the UB Libraries Education Services team with a focus on creating accessible content for all audiences.
Can we go right on into the first slide, please?
Can you guys see the slides?
I can see it.
Fantastic. Here we go.
All right. Good morning. Please take a moment to read over our learning objectives for today. Our goal is to share with you some of our experiences so you can get some ideas and information to move forward at your own institution, whether that's big or small. As always, if you have questions as we move through the presentation, please put them into your chat. Keep in mind that these learning objectives are deliberately supposed to be kind of broad and hopefully encompass everything we're going to cover today. So just take, I don't know, I'll give you 20, 30 seconds left to kind of just familiarize yourself with them. All right. So who are we? Where are we from? Well, we're from the University at Buffalo, which is a Tier 1 research institute. And I work with a team of librarians who deliver information literacy instruction for UB. We have approximately 21,000 undergraduates, which is pretty big. And we have to always keep scale in mind when we do our work because of that. Our job specifically focuses on us working with the first and second year students. And we're always working to bolster their information literacy skills as they move forward in their collegiate careers. One of the issues that we always have to kind of think about is this scale issue. And so when we create something, we're talking approximately 80 sections with 18 to 24 students per section for the information literacy component that we deliver for undergraduates. It's attached to another course, and this allows us to do a bunch of different things, but it translates to roughly 200 students per semester per instructor. So we do have a big team that works on this, so keep that in the back of your mind. I mention all of this because scale will always be an issue for us, and I don't want you to look at the fact that we do have a large team working on this and think, well, they have a large team, that's how they're able to do it. Take away what you can and implement what you can, whether you're at a large institution or somewhere much smaller, maybe it's just you. This should not be viewed as an all or nothing approach. Small changes can always have a big impact, and that's something that we've learned. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Bryan.
All right, so we're going to begin to talk about some of the issues. We do have a poll question that I would like to deploy. And if you could take a moment to answer that poll question, and then we'll discuss the answers and how people are. So feel free to deploy that. Those are not our questions.
They are not.
Okay. Sorry. Let me see if I can get to the other ones.
Not a problem.
Sorry to be a pest. Can you remind me, are you,
For session C1.
thank you.
Perfect. All right, so our poll question here is, when creating stuff for courses, how do you think about different languages or cultural barriers? So just answer honestly, is it often, sometimes, rarely, or never? And take the time to do that. And as you do that, I'm going to start discussing some of the issues that we actually go through. So when you discuss practical pedagogical delivery, all educators are going to face their own individual issues. So depending on where you teach and how often and the level of instruction, certain problems will be faced. In our collective experiences, and we do have a lot of them, we have faced a multitude of setbacks, all in the goal of benefiting our students in the most comprehensive ways. We have made a list of the most, for lack of a better term, popular issues in information literacy instruction. So we're going to begin with inclusive instruction. The operative word here is inclusive, and it goes without saying that students have individual needs, and considering all of your students can be a massive headache. However, embracing universal design for learning strategies, or UDL, can help to serve the mass of your students, which plays into removing barriers from our teaching. And we consistently hear this barrier term all the time. And trust us, they can be attacked and massaged out. So we're going to discuss some specific strategies later on and throughout this presentation. So our students are the lifeblood of education, and in that, they are diverse. So that's why we asked about the diversity question. In some cases, English is not going to be their native tongue. And in addition, some students have specified learning preferences that help them thrive if observed by their instructor. In this, you need to branch out and talk to your students to build connections. And the more you know about what they need, the easier it will become. More importantly, encountering these issues will inevitably take additional time and effort. Well, that's what we're prone to thinking, this additional time. But part of being an effective educator includes taking the time needed to best teach your students. That being said, do not let it cripple you. You surely have a certain allotment of time, and in that, use it to your advantage. Do not feel so bogged down that you end up overwhelmed. The best thing to do is just do what you can. Rome wasn't built in a day. Just because you might want to save the world one classroom at a time, it doesn't mean that you need to tackle all complications at once. Be smart, trust your instincts, and ask for support. Collaboration and communication here is key. So let's see if we can see the results of this poll. That'd be great. All right, so sometimes is our number one answer here. And like Keith said in our first slide, you know, we're at UB. We face a lot of different challenges that you may not see, but we bring up the different languages and cultural barriers because that kind of stimulated what we needed to do to better our course for all of our students, which you will see going forward. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Molly Maloney.
So thank you, Brian. The next question is really, why is it important to us? And ultimately for our team, the student always comes first. In our role as undergraduate education librarians, we have contact with a significant number of students on campus, like Keith said. For us, ADA compliance is a baseline. It's always a priority and always will be, using any tools available to us from our campus. And that includes things like Ally from our LMS, Blackboard. But we always felt that there was more we could do beyond the basics. And what struck a spark with us was when we began to work more closely with a particular demographic on campus. We were developing an embedded information literacy initiative, and we started to identify the unique needs of international students. We work with a freshman composition course that is split in delivery. Most are taught through the English department, but a smaller number are taught through the English Language Institute. They're the same course. They have the same learning outcomes, the same rigor. The only difference is that the latter are taught by ESL, EFL specialist instructors. International students can take either course based on their TOEFL scores. So after a year of working on these initiatives, our team of librarians worked to identify issues and iterate our content for improved delivery and effectiveness for highly diverse groups of students. We realized we could be doing more to lower these access barriers to, improve engagement with, and application of our content and concepts for these students. Through research and conversation, we realized that we could implement changes that would make our materials more readily accessible and inclusive for all students, regardless of linguistic background as a result. So then, how? How did we address this issue? How did we actually do it? We wanted to give you a snapshot. We're not going to go through all of it, but of what this process looked like for us by highlighting two of our highest impact decisions. I'm going to be covering the first one, right, on Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and it was really the first step we made with this particular priority in mind, pedagogically speaking. We had already previously made the shift from constructivism to social constructivism in the design of the course, incorporating active learning and flipped classroom strategies, but then began to incorporate UDL to put the priority on accessibility and inclusivity. Nicole is going to be covering a change she spearheaded, the development and implementation of a set of best practices for instructional video making that our entire team would employ, not only for our instruction, but for broader outreach projects as well. So much of our flipped classroom instruction and outreach depends on videos, obviously now more than ever, that failure to ensure that these videos were accessible is simply unacceptable to us. So we're going to start trying to make sure that everybody has a bit of an idea about UDL. So Becky, if you could deploy that second poll question, we'd like to get an idea of who's in the room, right? How many experts do we have? Do we have people who are just here starting to scratch the surface of UDL? So we'll give you a minute to answer that. Once we get all of our responses in, we'll take a look. Okay, we've got a fair mix, right? We've got a few experts in the room, right? We've got a lot of people falling somewhere in the middle and some that are brand new, right? And that's wonderful. That's fantastic, right? So for that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. Universal Design for Learning was really the first step. So it isn't a new concept, but it is very topical. Just recently at the Fact2 Symposium at the end of May, Kim Erland, the Dean of Student Life and College Diversity Officer at North Country Community College, spoke briefly about the need for universal design to meet student needs holistically and equitably in our current environment for that reach all, teach all reality. What is UDL? So it's an educational framework that guides the development of flexible learning environments and learning spaces that can accommodate individual learning differences. So that's the base definition, right? I've got an image here of the UDL guidelines, but please use that URL in the bottom corner. Once you get the slides, feel free to click on the image. It's a link out to an interactive and accessible version of these guidelines and a suite of additional resources. The structure itself focuses on three principles: the engagement of the learner in the column in green, right? The representation of the content, the middle column in purple, and the student's action and expression, the last column on the right in blue. The target is to provide multiple means of doing each. It also accounts for the vertical development for the students from the external to the internal. So for example, how we provide the content would be the external, all the way through the process for how the student has internalized that and is able to activate that background knowledge. Ultimately, it's about removing superficial barriers so that any productive struggle the student encounters is focused on the concepts for application and growth. By removing these barriers, we can allow for a wider, more diverse range of students to succeed. A large part of the appeal at the time that we took on UDL was the parallel between these frames and many of the common best practices for teaching in a foreign language setting. And the fact that we could then have further benefits to even more students beyond just that demographic on campus, that was really like having our cake and eating it too. So this is just a more specific look of at the UDL framework for our iteration of the course that began in fall of 2017 and onward. That's key, the idea that it was just the start at the fall of 2017. We already intended to make changes informed by assessment and feedback, instructor feedback, student feedback, and so on, to address certain bottlenecks that we were seeing in the course. In this slide, you can see some of the UDL checkpoints that we use not only in this first iteration, but the later ones as well. Our goal was to prioritize incorporation of checkpoints that best fit our issues to solve that stage of the puzzle. Some of the checkpoints were things that we were already doing, right? So facilitate managing information and resources. Well, we're a research and information literacy course. We were doing that fairly robustly, right? But also our recent shift from constructivism to social constructivism meant we already had a lot of established ties for that foster collaboration and community and the engagement under the build section. These checkpoints, in addition to the assessment data and experiential feedback, influence the changes that we made to be more intentionally inclusive and accessible in order to best address those student needs. Now, obviously, coming from the perspective of a multilingual student group, the representation column was a clear fit. But it also addressed certain issues we were seeing in the sections taught by the English department, right? Especially due to limited contact time with the students. Specifically, activate or supply background knowledge played a role in many of our decisions in terms of the flipped classroom model of instruction and how to start students off with their research. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Before, I said we used UDL to solve this stage of the puzzle, and that's very intentional. We have to acknowledge that teaching students is a moving target. Their needs change throughout the semester, from class to class, from semester to semester. It's impossible to definitively say we have solved a problem, right, on such a broad scale. We know that course building and iteration is not just the work of a single summer or a single semester, but it takes years to truly develop a dynamic course. We've had the good luck, the good fortune to be working on this since 2017 to incorporate UDL principles into our embedded instruction as well as our workshop style instruction. And we've really grown to have UDL more ingrained in the heart of our work.
So when accepting the task of creating instructional videos, it was important to consider visual and audio elements to reach a wide audience. It takes pre-planning, but the end result is valuable content that is accessible to all. So I'm going to outline a few basic practices and a few more advanced practices if you have the capability. In the pre-planning stage, start thinking about what your visual needs will be for your audience and how you can be inclusive to those with visual impairments. So asking yourself, will you use images, a screen capture, graphs, or text to present your information? If so, how will you give access to those with visual impairments? You should consider describing visual elements in your audio. Consider the color scheme for text or graphs. Ensure color combinations meet minimum web content accessibility guidelines, color contrast requirements. And there's actually a website that you can test these colors against each other. As you can see in the example on the slide, Light text on a bright background is very difficult to see, as is dark text on a dark background. If you use organizational branding, we here at UB do, make sure that you choose the color palette that best meets these requirements. Check with your institution's communication office or your ADA office for any branding colors that you might have at your institution. To speed up the video production process, use a script. A script is going to keep your concepts and delivery on target. A script will also help build your captions in post-production. Additionally, you can use the text from the scripts to build a transcript of your video. Transcripts will allow text from your video to be easily read by text-to-speech software. This brings us to post-production. Using closed captions assists those with hearing impairments, non-native speakers, and others. And this includes people that just don't want the audio on their video while the video is being played. If you prepared a script, embedding captions is much less time consuming. Check your video production product for a specific captioning tool, or there are a number of programs you can use to outsource the task. More advanced strategies you can implement would be to choose an accessible Section 508 compliant media player to play your videos. This can include a media player plugin or using a service to host your videos. And if you have the resources, test your videos and evaluate them for standards of accessibility. Use a screen reader on the web page where your video lives to test its compatibility, or check with your institution's guidance for an accessibility checklist.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. With all of this information about UDL and accessibility, we have some decisions to make, and we have to decide impact versus effort, because no one can do everything. And as we've mentioned multiple times, we do have a big team that works on this. Some of you may not have that luxury. It may just be you. So we wanted to talk a little bit about impact versus effort. So it's really up to the educator at the end. You're going to have to decide which things you're going to spend your time on. Remember the issues we discussed earlier in this presentation? Well, once again, they are peeking their head around the corner, and they always will. In our case, there have been semesters where we've taught 7 to 10 sections of our course that are English language learners alongside 70 sections of the traditional students. And again, how do we attack this? What did we do? Well, it took time, discussions, and analyzing our instruction and learning outcomes. We questioned ourselves and our abilities. What did we want? How did we want to get there? How long would it take? Which strategies would be easier to implement than others? It is an ongoing dialogue, and education always necessitates iteration. The process is never over. So when deciding how you want to amend your instruction or change something up, you can always weigh the impact against the effort, just like some of the examples we have in this list. Bryan?
Yeah, so to that end, whatever you embrace, it will undoubtedly enhance how you do things. Educational concepts will be easier for students to understand, especially if you include multimodal delivery. Whatever language barriers that exist will be broken, and it will open the door for students to get to the desired endpoint of your course more efficiently. The effort spent is going to include time, possible frustrations, and presumable setbacks. These are all things that we have encountered. Like Molly has said, we've had since the fall of 2017. We've been continuing this the whole time to figure out what we could do. So for you, you might need to acquire new hardware or software technology to augment your teaching. However, there might be budgetary constraints. I mean, we all have them. So is there a free tool to use? And if so, where can you find it? This is where collaboration is your friend. Think of all of this as an evaluation of a task-based solution. Prioritize what gets done. You need to be direct in judging the barriers for success. Take into account your limits when weighing how much effort you can put in. Each case is individual to each instructor and each student. There is no one-size-fits-all model. We all know this. So always work towards doing your best and trust your instincts and professional experience. That's really what it comes down to.
So we want to give you some examples of how we used this method of prioritizing to address the issues that we talked about before that were high impact. So in terms of UDL, I'm going to start by talking about TED Talks. They were a high impact, low effort initiative that we rolled out. So I mentioned before we were prioritizing checkpoints from the representation principle from UDL to address the issues we were facing with student group research projects in terms of engagement with the materials, text-only delivery, and application of background knowledge. We tried a number of formats already, students starting research from scratch, using Wikipedia pages as a background knowledge area, and so on. However, these issues proved to be barriers to impactful instruction in only seeing the students once a week for 8 to 12 weeks of the semester. We certainly acknowledge that that is a wealth of time compared to what some librarians, instruction librarians get. Sometimes we only have one-shots as an option, but since we had this opportunity, we were trying to do a lot in just this one course to develop it effectively and efficiently. Those time and scale barriers were not ones that we could move. However, we recognized that there were ones we could move, we could control. We needed to ensure that all students in a research group had some shared background knowledge on a topic before we began the brainstorming and narrowing process. To address this, we created starter packs. What these include are a TED Talk, a scholarly source, a popular source, and links to any relevant reference articles that they may need, usually from GVRL. Here we provide them with a topic that is researchable, universal in nature, and as relevant as possible to college undergrads. Typically things like issues with sleep, social media, entrepreneurship, because we have a lot of business students and so on. These TED Talks had significant advantages over our previous models. First off, they were multimodal. Not only do they have visual and audio components, but they have captions and transcripts. As you play through the video, the text is highlighted in the transcript dynamically for the corresponding audio. And you can see that in the slide here. The bottom portion is a screenshot of the transcript, and you can see the corresponding audio is highlighted in light blue. TED Talks are multilingual. Both closed captions and transcripts can be found for a large variety of languages without loss of functionality or content. Again, you can see that in the screenshots. They're narrative. It's simply more engaging to watch and listen to a story told by an expert than to be given yet another reading. TED Talks are concise. As a starting place, a video that packs a lot of key issues surrounding a topic into just a few minutes is a valuable way to maintain that engagement and make sure everyone has a common background. Now for the con. The only con is that TED Talks have to be curated, and it's barely a downside as that effort is minimal. It's really, truly low effort. We originally only used TED Talks that were 6 minutes or less, but to find videos that met our other standards, that they're vetted experts, they're universal in nature, relevant, we eventually expanded the length within reason. I think our longest one is about 10 to 12 minutes. Not all of the videos, especially newer ones as they come up, have as robust a selection of languages, simply because it takes time to source those translations. Part of the review process is to ensure that the languages with the highest representation on campus are included: Chinese, Spanish, Korean, and so on. We also go through this process each semester for a few reasons. First, academic honesty. Changing the topics regularly helps prevent academic dishonesty from semester to semester. Second, not every topic goes over as well as we think it's going to, whether it's because of those immobile barriers or cultural differences. This is part of what led us to require that topics be more universal in nature. Lastly, and not least, our sanity. With the number of groups and classes that we each teach, sometimes we need a fresh batch of topics to avoid stagnation. We've seen the improvement, and that's the bottom line, right? Of the issues that we mentioned before, we've been able to see progress, not just on a small scale of single students, but on a larger scale from class to class, that more students were able to demonstrate that they have engaged with the content, they have a better understanding of that content, and they can apply that content in class discussions, assignments, and activities, and not just at the very beginning where they had to read it or watch it for that day, but throughout the research process throughout the semester.
Okay, next we're going to talk about high impact and high effort with Alma Primo. So when Alma Primo rolled out last year, another colleague and I were charged with creating a LibGuide that guided the end user through the most basic tasks. The most important objective was to make the guide accessible as possible to reach a wide audience, especially considering this product was implemented SUNY-wide. The impact of the guide on end users is high, and here are some examples. Videos and still images were used to illustrate steps to accomplishing their tasks. I'm going to show you our guide that we used. All right, so if you take a look, can everyone see the guide?
Yep.
All good.
It is there.
Good. All right.
That's
I'm
good.
going to show you that each tab here is packaged with some kind of visual tutorial and text instructions. The videos that we have, and we'll go to this tab for basic searching. Okay, it shows step-by-step instructions with a voiceover in the video. And it includes closed captions. Okay, burned captions is also another option as well. Closed captions, meaning you can turn them on and off. Burned in captions, if you're using a program that has that, the captions are always going to appear at the bottom. We also have images that show stills with a bold box around the specific area to be selected. And our aim here was to reach the audience where they are without overwhelming them with information. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with all the bonus features that are frequently added to Primo. So this leads me to the high effort it takes to maintain the guide. This guide, like Primo, is always a work in progress. I'm usually the point person for all suggested changes, and this can prove to be challenging as these requests never stop. Every time there's a new feature added or the interface changes slightly, I'm asked to make changes to the videos. The images are really no problem because it takes a few seconds, but the videos are much more time consuming, especially having to go back in and, if anything has changed, if the interface has changed, you have to take that into consideration, and it takes quite a bit of time. It definitely takes a village to keep this guide afloat though. In order to keep the information comprehensive and accurate, I have to reach out to multiple departments. The outcome is definitely worth it though. If we can reach our end user at their point of need, I would consider this a success.
Thank you, Nicole. Before I talk about what's going on right now, I just want to say a lot of the time we'll be walking to our classrooms and I will hear students listening to videos and I hear Nicole's voice narrating something and I'm like, where's Nicole? She does so many videos and does such a great job. So get used to her voice because it is all over UB when it comes to education. Alrighty, so everything must be online yesterday. This is great. Education has gotten pretty interesting lately, to say the least. So COVID-19 has thrown quite a wrench into the way instruction has been delivered at all levels. Teaching information literacy can already be frustrating, so changing things up on the fly lends itself to quite another headache. But when it comes to accessibility, keep in mind the following. First, where are your students? Since University of Buffalo is such an extensive international population, this was one of the largest things we personally dealt with and are still dealing with. Are students stateside or have they traveled to their home? This leads into the next point. Access to materials. So right now, campuses are relatively empty. Access to that one book on the 4th floor that students might need is impossible. So consider the circumstances at hand. When building your course or even amending it or assisting a faculty member, explore the accessibility of the content. Is there an open educational resource that you can choose? In response to COVID-19, many OERs popped up with free access. At UB, I was charged with organizing them for all faculty so they knew that there were options to choose from. In addition, if you need your students to get materials that are not easily accessible and you would usually promote interlibrary loan, perhaps avoid doing that right now. Everyone's ILL policies are different. Next, use your learning management system or LMS. These are things like Blackboard, Moodle, Schoology. So if you're used to physical handouts, that's totally fine. But remember that information literacy instruction is often embedded into other courses. Collaboration and communication is still key here. If you work within other courses, you can build a module with content that is long-lasting for students. It's not just going to disappear. They can always go back and reference it as long as they're in the course. In addition, most LMS have integrated programs like Ally that Molly talked about earlier, and they will evaluate the accessibility of your content and tell you the rating for a student. To be safe, make sure all videos you have and choose are closed captioned, and that all documents can easily be read with a document reader. If you need help with your LMS, reach out to the necessary parties at your institution for additional support. Also, Google is your friend. This is something we tell our students all the time. LibGuides and research paths are also wonderful tools for both students and faculty alike. In the event that no physical interactions can happen, patrons still need a lifeline of sorts. The teachable moments a librarian might have throughout the semester, they're not going to go away. They just need to be amended and manipulated. Providing this kind of support will promote a library presence as well as staying power for those who might be needing it. Utilizing tools that are made available to you through your college or university, that's always a good idea too. For example, UB has Panopto for video making and access to Zoom for teaching and conferencing. Be aware of possible setbacks here, such as captioning woes when it comes to gender differences for words and recording, especially if you have a certain accent. Beyond this, consider embedding quizzes and gamifying your learning through quizzes or Kahoots. Your institution has instructional designers and support to lean on, so if you have any questions or need assistance, reach out to those who are there to help you. You are not alone at all. All right, so that is our presentation. We are now going to open up the floor to some questions and answers. I know we already have some. So whomever wants to take a look, feel free, and we'll start answering some questions.
Yeah, I can read the questions in the Q&A for you. So the first question that we received was, it's regarding captioning. I've heard that setting up captions so that they are opt-in could be useful for students with cognitive issues. That would make them more a distraction than a help. An example would be having a button that can be clicked to display them as opposed to embedding them in the video itself. Have you found this is true? So burned in captions versus clickable captions.
I can take this one. I have not received any issues with the captions, but the program that I use to make videos, I use Camtasia for the most part. And I found that when you render the video at the end, they give you the option to select burned in captions or captions that come up under the video, or there's one that you can have a toggle for on and off. I pretty much use the burned in captions because I found sometimes that when you have the on off for the closed captions, it doesn't always work correctly. So I think depending on what product that you're using to create your videos, try rendering your video in different options to see like what comes up. You might have to test it out a few times and then see which option would work best for your users.
Our next question, did your library have formal UDL training, or was this something that you all adopted together with no training?
So I'll take that one. In terms of the library having formal UDL training, not as a major unit. I mean, we're a fairly large library. And on the education services team, I am the one that brings UDL to the table here. And it's through my own research and workshops and trainings that I have done. So there's no broad scale formal training.
Keith, Molly, Nicole, and myself, we've all worked with UDL so heavily now, especially within the last couple of years, that we've done a lot of things independently and individually too, just to kind of get better with UDL and having it be more of something that we want to continue using. So everything that we do now, because of whatever backgrounds we have with it, tend to influence a lot of the decisions we make with our courses. So all of the materials that we do now will have a UDL spin to it, just because I feel like the more that we talk about it, especially within our team, and the more that we do, the better we get at it. It's kind of one of those practice makes perfect sort of things. So regardless of any real professional training that you do, the more you get your feet wet in experience, it seems the better that we tend to be getting with it.
The next question, did you come up with ways for students to access your great online resources if they don't have high-speed internet or no internet at all?
I will take this one. As of right now, I can honestly say no, because we are also ingrained with thinking everybody has high-speed online, capability. This is not the case, and I know that this is an extreme barrier. A lot of the students that we were teaching throughout this last semester, especially the students that are not from the United States, were having extreme issues getting to content. It might have been because of what was going on with just the climate. A lot of students were quarantining, and as soon as they got back to their home country, I had a Korean student who couldn't leave the house without being arrested. Thankfully, he did have access to the internet. So it seems to be a case-by-case basis. If anybody had any issues with accessing anything at all, we do remedy those situations and those complications one by one with our students. It seems that there hasn't been a large issue brought to our attention, but that being said, I'm not going to be ignorant and say that it's not happening. I completely know it's happening, and hopefully it's something that we can work on in the future. I do know just by doing chat reference that some students have been taking mobile hotspots out of our library and have been having them for an extended period of time. That has helped to remedy that solution for them. So I hope that other people have access to it. In the future, we definitely need to figure out some way to break down that barrier, especially if we're going to continue to be doing a lot more remote access learning and pretty much everything online.
Okay, thank you. The next question, how often are sign language interpreters included in your videos?
I can take that one. Unfortunately, at this point, they're not, right? Budgets are what they are, and doing something like paying for a ASL interpreter is not something we've ever gone after because we have those built-in closed captioning tools, but that would be a fantastic addition to our repertoire, right? And it's definitely something worth looking into, right? Thanks for that great idea, honestly.
Okay. The next question, and this is the last question I have in the Q&A. What would you say to those that feel that international students learning at U.S. institutions should be forced to do all their work in English?
That's a me question again. Absolutely not. My background is in linguistics and second language acquisition, and I would thoroughly disagree that they should be restricted to English only. The idea that they could move between the two languages, especially as they are building their expertise, especially going from learning, textbook standard English especially internationally, they may have been learning British English, to suddenly having to dive deeply into academic English to rob them of the ability to go back and forth, especially, for example, with the TED Talks, where they could listen to the audio, they would have the transcript in English, but then also in perhaps their native language or a second language, depending on how many languages they speak. That gives them the opportunity to go back and forth between them and see different contexts where certain terms are used. And I see in the chat right now, we have a comment that says the institution would miss out in a lot of talent if they restricted learning to those totally fluent in English. And that's absolutely true. And we also have other points about variations of English, absolutely true as well, right?
One thing that we tend to see with our English language learners is that, you know, your class is always going to be a little different, especially for us. Sometimes we get all Chinese students. Sometimes we get students that are all Turkish. It's like a Turkish cohort. The one thing that we try to do is to mix up our research groups with those starter packs and try to get as much difference in language altogether. So it kind of fosters development of English, but it is not restricting at the same time. It would be restricting if we did not make the materials accessible for all students so that they could use the TED Talks with the different translations and the transcriptions in their native tongue if they need it. So we try to foster more or less a community of language, just so we don't see our groups reverting to just speaking their native tongue. However, we would never, I could say that without a shadow of a doubt, within our educational team, we would never force that on anybody. That's just not correct. And to that point that Rajni said in the chat, restricting learning to those totally fluent in English, that would be definitely messing with a lot of talent. So
the other thing to add in here is that, and this is more anecdotal, is especially I think I've seen this more with our Chinese students, is sometimes they do their searching and a lot of their work will be done on their personal computers, and you'll go over and you'll have to have them switch from, you know, traditional Chinese characters to, you know, actually switch it over to English so you can actually read it, because they're doing their work, their preliminary work in their native language, because that's what they understand. And I think if we're forcing them to only use our language, only use English, we're creating a barrier to what we're actually trying to teach them, which is information literacy. And they are required to report back in English, obviously, because you're required to grade them and to work with them. So we have to kind of gauge their understanding in ways that we also understand. So I think it provides a nice transition for them to, if they're going to use, you know, maybe the language that they grew up with, that they know best, to kind of interpret what we've tried to teach them and then, you know, bring that back around and, you know, report back in English. I think that process actually helps them learn in some ways, or at least with some of the students that I've talked to, it has helped them. So throwing that out there.
Okay, I haven't seen any other questions in the Q&A. So I'd like to thank our presenters for presenting. Next up is lunch and then the EBSCO meeting. There was a new link emailed to everyone this morning. So be sure to check your email for the new link so you don't end up in the wrong place.
all right, thank you all for attending. We encourage you to take a look at the reference page once all of the presentations get emailed out with the PDFs, and feel free to email any of us. We will all tackle any issues, any questions. The more that we talk to each other, especially within this consortium, the better off we're all going to be. So what we can do to help and what you can do to help us, just keep that conversation going.